Peace and welcome to a special episode of Artistry, where art meets industry. I am your host, Rochelle Etienne-Robinson. If you are joining us for the very first time, welcome to the Artistry podcast, where we are joined by visual or performing artists and or arts administrators to discuss their creative journey. If this sounds like something that piques your interest, please be sure to like and subscribe to learn more about us and our guests. If you are already a subscriber, welcome back. We have a special treat for you today. Today's guest is a poet born and bred and still living in New York City's uptown Manhattan's Washington Heights neighborhood. She has been writing poetry before most kids know how to write their own names. She obtained her MFA in poetry from NYU's poetry program in Paris. She holds a master's in public health from Columbia University and a BA with a double major in social anthropology and journalism creative writing. Her poetry has been published in the BreakBeat Poets Latinext Anthology, Narrative Magazine, LitHub, Oh Dear Magazine, and Raising Mothers. Her 9/11 poem is now part of the Smithsonian Museum's 9/11 archives. In 2021, she released Stillmatic, a spoken word hip-hop jazz single on all streaming platforms. And this month, she releases her first full-length spoken word album, To Make an Island of a Street Corner. Please welcome our very, very special friend and guest, Anacaona Rocio Milagro. Yay!
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
What
Congratulations. Oh, thank you. I mean, it's all true. It's all you. It's what you provided us, right? Now, give our viewers some background. You are born and bred in Washington Heights.
Yes.
Those of you who may not be familiar, but may be familiar with, the Heights, the play that was made famous by Lin-Manuel. Born to a Dominican father and a mother from St. Thomas, you began writing at 4 years old. Now, honey, okay, I have a 6-year-old. We're still working on, sight words. Homegirl is out here, expressing her soul at 4 years old. What's happening at 4 years old?
Well,
what are we talking about?
I told my mother I was writing poems and I was scribbling something, but that's what she understood, that I was writing poetry. And because I made that declaration, she'd ask, what am I writing? And she'd see me cutting papers out and sewing the spine of those papers and making the declaration, like, I'm writing a poetry book. Like, this is what I'm doing. But then also, as my writing improved, she would collect all of those little papers and collect all of those little poems. So, yeah, I did start writing at a really early age. And I attribute that also because I have older brothers. Yeah. And when she would teach us things, she would always just sit us all together. I'm the youngest. I'm the only girl.
Oh,
I have
the
three.
baby.
Yes, I have 3 older brothers, and so it was just like having to learn at a faster pace, not really accommodating the fact that I'm like 4 or I'm the youngest. So I kind of had to just keep up somehow. And I was lucky that I'm pretty observant. I always have been, and really keen on listening and watching and paying attention. So learning wasn't ever something that was too difficult, for me at that age, I guess. Especially when you're trying to copy off your older brothers.
Yeah. What's the age gap between you being the youngest and the second youngest?
So we're all 2 years apart.
Okay.
So if I'm 4, then the other one was 6, 8, 10.
Yeah.
The oldest was 10.
So mommy was just like, let me just
give
give myself a 2-year break in between.
Yeah.
Okay. So congratulations on this beautiful, beautiful book.
Thank you.
Of poems. You also released your first spoken word album that accompanies this book.
Yes.
It's riveting. It's very emotional at times.
Yes.
It has all the things. For those of you that are from New York or have been to New York, especially in New York growing up in the 80s and 90s, like you paint such a beautiful picture of that era.
Okay. Thank you.
But there's some things that are, it's disturbing to hear. And this is autobiographical. Like all this, everything that you mentioned in this book actually happened.
Yep.
And so one of the many stories that are listed in this book is, and also in the the spoken word album, you have Lunch Lady Jackie.
Yes.
And so tell us about Lunch Lady Jackie.
Sure. So I wrote that poem when I was 14 years old. And like many of the poems in the book and on the album, because I started writing at such a young age, and I knew that I was a poet at such a young age, and just any time I had one of these moments that were very like pivotal, right? This was the first time I witnessed. I was about 10 years old, and I absolutely adored my lunch lady. You know, I'm sure everyone could possibly relate, just being so excited about seeing someone when you're that young, and wanting their attention, wanting to be in their line of vision, and just being celebrated with them. The high fives, the pinches on the cheeks, all the sass, and all that celebratory moment with your person. Yeah. So I adored her. She came with that energy every day to school, and every time I saw her, it was just like, everything is great in the world, right? Yeah. She was like her own son. And you know, growing up in the 80s in Washington Heights, you know, this is during the crack epidemic. I'm young, and everyone that I kind of knew was unfortunately either struggling with addiction my entire life. So I never saw them before addiction. So I only knew someone who was struggling with addiction, like as an addict. That's the addict of the block. Like that's the person. That's their personality, that's their character, that's how I knew them. So there was nothing devastating about seeing an addict, right? But I had never ever experienced someone transition from not being an addict into an addict. Right. And then to let alone let it be this woman that I adored. And it just didn't make sense. It was so, it was devastating. It was completely devastating. I remember just being completely absorbed by her, like seeing her on the corner. I was holding my mother's hand. We were walking, and she's on the corner. All her stuff is there, and she's like shaking, and she's, you know, completely struggling with addiction in the worst way in that moment. And I see her, and I know it's her. She doesn't see me. I'm like in her line of vision, the way that I would make myself in her line of vision when I was in the lunchroom, like just trying to connect. Yes, but she didn't see me. I saw her, but she wouldn't see me, though she wouldn't blink or anything like that. Her eyes was just frozen open, and she was shaking. And I just remembered the first thing I thought was, there's a crack is wax sign, like right outside the lunchroom. Like, how is it this happen? Like, no, not you. Like, wait, not even no, not you. It was just, hold on. Yeah. This can happen to somebody? Like, and, you know, like realizing that you're this could happen to anybody. Like, I didn't understand that until that moment. And it was so heartbreaking. It was so devastating. I remember just going home and just really wondering about, you know, how she turned into someone struggling with addiction. And then when I got older, I never forgot about that. And then I obviously started to encounter more people that would make the transition, and it was heartbreaking over and over again. But she was the first, and that was the most devastating. It was one that I couldn't forget or let go of. So when I turned 14, I remember writing about that. I didn't write about it that young. At that age, I was writing more like nursery rhyme kind of things. And I remember writing something about like being mad at my dad, and you know, like something like that. But then I got a little older, and I started to dabble in, you know, more of expression and all of that.
Can I ask you, did your mom ever explain to you, like, did you guys ever talk about it?
No, we never talked about it.
Yeah.
No, my mom and I had a very interesting relationship. So while my mother was always struggling with clinical depression, right? Like clinical, like chronic, deep depression. And also she was clinically struggling with obsessive compulsive disorder. To this day, she's always been struggling with this. So there's not things that I would trust to have a conversation about. But you know, she's an incredibly intelligent woman and an incredibly loving woman. But I never wanted to add any kind of like hair to her consciousness, because I would always think she'd crack, you know? So I would be anything that I would encounter that would be confusing or heartbreaking. It's not something that I could go to anybody with. I would literally go to the page, like maybe not at 10 when I wasn't in that part of my writing journey yet, but definitely when I got a bit older, like I would say 13, 14 years old. I know I wrote Lunch Lady Jackie when I was 14, I remember. And that poem, has been with me ever since. I would revise it just because I understood myself at 14 and why I wrote it, trying to resolve the confusion for me at 10. That was me trying to help my 10-year-old self untangle what it was that we saw, and I think that just has never ended, right, to adulthood. And it ended up being the line from Lunch Lady Jackie, "She made an island of a street corner," ended up being the title of the book.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, this again, with this book having, with stories like Lunch Lady Jackie, the next one I wanted to talk about is To Defy a Roach, which again is very riveting, very, again, it was so expressive. Like you're really like walking us through the room, walking us through your journey. And it was so vivid that it was, it gets you all choked up, because it's like, oh my gosh, like I know, we know this experience. For those of you that are, when you read the book or listen to the spoken word album, it's done so well. It's organized and produced so well that you are able to literally, you're going through the journey. You are walking through. She's inviting you to this story. And the story happens to be the story of your life, a portion of your life.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about To Defy a Roach, an American horror story.
Yes.
Tell us about the title and what's going on there for those of us who have not heard or read.
Sure. So it's so funny. Everyone says to defy, but there's an I in there. So it's to deify.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
It's all good. Everyone does it. Every single person. So to deify, to turn a roach into a deity, right?
Oh,
so that's what the title, where it comes from, because, again, God bless my mother, right? She had her, struggles with mental health and her struggles with her health and all of that. But the one thing she absolutely did, and this is why I attribute her to not only being my mother, but also being my mother as far as my art form. She is that maternal portion that, birthed my poetic art. So she would do two things. We shared a bed, until I was like 20, 21 when I moved out. She and I, we grew up in poverty. My mother, we were on welfare and all of that. So she and I shared a bed. And when I was younger, she would always sing nursery rhymes. All the nursery rhymes she memorized from St. Thomas. She'd sing them to me all the time, and I love the music, and I love the rhyme, and I love the play, and I love the storytelling, and I would just listen and soak it up. So that was like my first introduction to language, falling in love with language. And then the other flip side, what she would do is give us Bible studies. So my mother's a Jehovah's Witness, has always been a Jehovah's Witness since I was born. And she was just avid about giving us Bible studies. Now, there's times where she wouldn't get out of bed for days, but once a week we got our Bible study. That's one thing she did her best to not ignore, or to not, kind of put off. That in church, we would have to go to church. And when she would feel good, sometimes we would miss church, because she wouldn't be able to get out of bed. But so it would be the Bible and nursery rhymes. And mind you, I'm the youngest, and she would give us all Bible studies because it was conserving energy for her. She didn't have much energy. She was over-medicated. She's on using Medicaid and using public assistance, and unfortunately, you don't get the best care. So they over-medicated her. She was always zombied out all the time, unfortunately, throughout our childhood. And she, to this day, now that she's older and she went through getting off meds and doing the organic route, so she's a lot more conscious and able to interact. She's always apologizing. I'm sorry, I was a vegetable when you were growing up. I'm so sorry. I'm like, Ma, it's fine. We're good. We grown. It's all good. But when she would muster the energy, she would sit us all down, and it would be weekly, and she'd give us a Bible study. And the way she would give us a Bible study is also what I attribute to my skill as a poet. She would take a Bible text, a little piece of Bible text, and rip it apart. She would like interrogate us and be like, what do you think it means? What does the image mean? What does this mean? And we would literally sit there and go through the work of, that's critical reading, right? Sharp critical reading with advanced language, right? I'm tiny and I'm doing it and I'm getting it and I'm loving it. Like, I love that exercise. And, and it created a really strong muscle for metaphor.
Do you think your mom knew what she was doing?
Absolutely not. She had no idea. My mother never even finished junior high school. So she's an intelligent woman, clearly, like the way she can do this. And she's just naturally poetic. Like she sneezed parables and proverbs that I'd be like collapsing, like, oh my God, let me write this down. Like, she's such a beautiful, brilliant, profound woman naturally. It's just her natural way. And I know many of us have met grandparents and our elders or whoever who just effortlessly speak wisdom and just with such beautiful language without thinking twice and not even knowing that they're not aware that they're doing it.
Right.
I do think it's something like genetic, something in the DNA, something that we bring from beyond that stays with us. And I do think it was hereditary. Like I got that gene from my mother. So I would say like, she made me fall in love with language or activated what I was born with in my DNA, right? When she would sing and when she would say the nursery rhymes and then when she would go into these Bible texts and rip them apart and have us, understand what the words were meant to do, right? And all of that was really fascinating for me. I knew I was a poet immediately because of how I reacted to language. So if she would say something beautiful or if I would hear something beautiful, you know how you smell something really good, your mouth starts to salivate, like that's how I react to good words.
Right.
So that's not something you think about, it's like a physical reaction, like it's in your body. So I knew no matter what, you couldn't tell me nothing. You could say anything you want about me. Like you could question my intelligence, my worth, you can make me feel unloved, you can do all of that, but you could not tell me I wasn't a poet. I didn't care if I didn't have a degree. It didn't matter. I knew that I had that gift, and I knew I got it from her. And this is something that I was just born with. But yeah, I'm sorry. Did I go on a tangent?
No, it's okay, because it gives me an opportunity to correct myself. So to Deify a Roach, an American horror story.
Yes.
How did you come up with the title?
Okay.
And tell us about it.
That's why I went on a tangent about religion. So I loved the storytelling in the Bible or in anything. I really started getting into like Egyptian mythology and understanding like the power of like myth making and all of that when I was young. And I think that's kind of what became like a survival tool, right? Understanding there's all this trauma happening around us. Now, this is the 80s in New York City. This is during the crack epidemic. And then by the time the 90s hit, so I'm like, young in the 90s, and we have the 1994 crime bill that gets launched. So to Deify a Roach, an American horror story, it definitely focuses on the 1994 crime bill and how exactly that affected our community. And specifically also my household, like how it, because I had 3 older brothers, our father was not in the picture, and my mom was always sickly, so it was kind of like we had to kind of like raise ourselves to a certain extent. And so, we were young, we were so young, like if I'm 10, the other one's 12, 14, 16, right, because we're all 2 years apart. These are kids, right, and we're just kind of like living our lives, going to school, trying to do whatever it is that we have to do to live and eat or whatever. And there was so much crime in the streets. And, there's a line in the poem that I think a lot of people miss. And it's such a specific thing, but it's such a simple thing, where I say, the drug dealers and murderers morphed into my young brothers. My brothers did not morph into drug dealers and murderers. It was like these roles pre-existed, right? We did not want or aspire to be these things, right? They were there far before we ever even we're conscious enough, like, you know, the poem is talking about, like, we were just learning how to read and count. And, like, suddenly we're running labs of molecules, of white rocks. Like, we don't have that skill set. You know, we are children. How, if I can't even get a book, if I can't even get school lunch, if I can't even get shoes, how'd I get a semi-automatic weapon? Someone had to give that to me.
Right.
And we were in no position to just obtain that. These things were literally like, it felt like it was like left on our doorstep. And, you know, the poem talks a lot about how it felt like immediately, the minute you stepped out the door, growing up in my neighborhood, that you were just set up for failure. You know, which what looked like failure also looked like a solution, right? Because that's the paradox of this box that I'm talking about that's left on our doorstep. It's, you see something that could possibly feed you, and this could solve our problem of hunger, right? But it's not really, because it's now setting you up to be eaten alive by the system. And then the 1994 crime bill comes out, and in my neighborhood, literally every day when I would come home from school, no matter what you were doing, you could be a bus driver, you could be a chef, you could be a delivery boy, no matter what you were doing, or you could be one of the drug dealers, you know, whatever, everybody's on the wall. On the wall, on the wall, on the wall. Everyone, every single day, I'd come home with my little book bag, coming home from school, everybody's on the wall, getting searched, getting thrown into vans, and this was the success of Giuliani, right? He just threw everyone in jail. He terrorized everyone, and it was mainly the males. So all three of my brothers ended up in the system, you know, unfortunately. And there's another poem that's not on the album, but it's in the book, and it's been published by Narrative magazine. It's a very long title, but it talks about in detail how my 12-year-old brother was like set up to do like a 2-year bid for a crime he didn't commit. It was unfortunate. Like
at 12 years old. At
12, yes, at 12. And you know, my that brother he's wild. So he actually escaped from jail at 12. Yeah, there's that. All of that is in there. He escaped. He literally escaped. 12 years old, jumped out of a window, kicked a security guard in the face, barefoot during the snow, told the cab driver that someone jumped him and took his shoes. Can he please get a ride? And escaped from Spofford. Yeah. Crazy story.
Oh,
and then he lived on the run. You know, he couldn't come home. And it broke my heart because, you know, he and I were like the closest in age. And I just remember like the day they took him, and he kept saying, you know, I didn't do it. And I knew he did not do it. Yeah. And then to go to Spofford is an awful place to be, you know, for young boys. And he literally escaped. And when I heard him, you know, the facility call my mom, and my mom's like repeating everything that the guard is telling her. He did what? He kicked the guard in the face, jumped out the window, and I'm sitting there like, yeah, he got away, yeah, that's my brother. I was so happy that he escaped, you know, but broken also because where are you? Like, you're living in the streets, where are you? Like, he couldn't come home, and one day he called, and and I remember before my mother hung up, and this is all in the poem, she's like, like, if he comes home, I'll call the police. And I was just like, And he wouldn't come home for a couple of months, and then one day he called, and my mother convinced him, please just come home, I just want to see you, I miss you. And he came home, and she called the police. And they took him again, and he had to do the bid.
Oh my gosh.
It was awful. It was awful. And all of that is in the poem.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
I'm still I'm in shock and awe at 12 years old. Like,
yeah, that's my. But that one is not in the To Deify A Roach poem. I'm sorry, I completely went left. But To Deify A Roach was about the 1994 crime bill and everyone getting locked up, and especially like it was mainly the males, women too. But for me, from what I saw, it was a lot of harassment for the men in my neighborhood. And I remember just every single little boy that they used to play with and come do video games, they were all in jail, every single one of them. And I remember just feeling completely alone. And, you know, these are the people that I would go to if something would happen and be like, oh, I'm going to get my brother, I'm going to get my brother's friend. Like, there's no one to get. Yeah. You know, you're unprotected, right?
You had mentioned earlier, and I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but I just for context, you mentioned that your mother was dealing with, you know, depression, clinical depression. Was that happening during this? You think that depression was a result of her children being taken from her? Or was this something that was happening even before?
Yeah, it was happening even before. So my mom has a very, very interesting story. She suffered a whole lot of trauma, a whole lot of trauma. My mother grew up rich, right? She grew up in a mansion in St. Thomas. She was adopted by her aunt. So this is where it gets wild, right?
I'm ready. I'm buckled in. I'm buckled in.
So if you look at my mother's birth certificate, mother's age is 15. Father's age is 54.
Oh my God.
So her father was like, I think he was pretty wealthy, St. Thomian, good-looking guy, had lots of children, and the rumor is, that I understand it, is that he had children older than my mother's mother.
Right.
But by the time he got to her, she was 14, he went to her father, and they were very impoverished, and was like, I will trade you a radio for your daughter, so that's how they got married. It was because of a radio. And they got married, and his sister never had children. And she was the one that lived in the mansion in St. Thomas. She was like this. To this day, I believe it's still up. There's a wing in the hospital named after her, because she was like the head nurse and all of this stuff. And, she never had any children. She wanted a child. And when he married my grandmother, she got pregnant with my mom, and he immediately took her and gave her to her first child, my grandmother's first child, which is my mom, gave her to the aunt to adopt and raise.
Wow.
So my mom and her biological mother they didn't grow up together. And her biological mother is Dominican, right? So my mother's biological mother is Dominican. Her father is St. Thomian, but she was raised in St. Thomas and adopted and lived her life with her adopted mother in St. Thomas without any connection to the Dominican Republic. So her whole life was St. Thomian. And she never really met her biological mother until, right?
Wow.
This is so she was happy. She was so happy living in St. Thomas. She was on floats during Carnival. They would take her to Puerto Rico to go shopping. Like, she was, she was in a their version of Broadway show as a kid. Like, she was good. And then her adopted mom passed away. And when her adopted mom passed away, she also lived in that big mansion with another sister. And that sister was not well and was insanely abusive. And so my mom ended up running away from home. And then the cops found her and brought her back. And she started beating my mom right in front of the cops. So the cops just took my mom and put her in a group home. So she kind of lived in the group home for the rest of her years until she was 18, and she was aging out. And all of this is in the book, too.
Wow.
And when she aged out, she was so scared of being homeless. She literally took a shoe and beat her head until it was bloody so she could have a bed in the hospital. And she woke up in the hospital, and they somehow found her a biological father who, she didn't really have a relationship with. And he saw her, picked her up from the hospital, and sent her to the Dominican Republic to meet her biological mother. She don't speak no Spanish. She's full St. Thomian accent. She had an afro. She's a black woman. Right. Sent her to DR, met her mother for the first time, and her mother, the first thing she said was look at you with your nappy hair, you're something really, racist and all the things that you can imagine. So my mother hated living in the Dominican Republic. She lived there a year with her. She was miserable. She learned the language, and eventually they ended up shipping her to Washington Heights in New York City to live with her sister. And her sister that, she had so many brothers and sisters from all
both sides, from all the sides.
Yeah, so she met this sister, she came over here to live with her, and that sister was running what they call my poor mom. She ran a botanica. So she was catching spirits and reading cards, and people would get spirits and start shaking and vomiting, and my mom was like, I am not living here. Ended up running away from there, and then met my dad. And my dad is Dominican, and they ended up moving together. They had my oldest brother, and then they had the other brother, And then, so at this point, by this time, she's already suffered a whole lot of trauma.
Right.
So the depression, and I think, I don't know if when the OCD started, I don't think she's ever told me that part. But it almost feels like once her adopted mother died, it was almost like her mental capacities kind of became stuck. Because sometimes when you talk to her, she sounds like a really young person, and her thinking can be really, really young. And it was almost like it stunted her growth. Like she stopped mentally developing at a very young age.
Right.
So I always felt like, and she says this to me all the time, you were my mother. You were my mother. She loved singing nursery rhymes with me. Like she's always had a very young mind and young spirit. But it was because of trauma, and she'd make a lot of weird decisions that, us as kids would be like, Lord, weird thing, like weird decisions. But she had such a good heart. Like she'd come home with a bird that was sick and want to nurse it to health. And we not dying because of this bird. That bird is sick. You're going to get all of us sick. Get the bird out of here. Oh, but it's sick. And we're like, oh, Lord. She has a heart of gold. She's a beautiful, beautiful person and means well.
Right.
But yeah, I don't, and she does obsess. Like she can't let go of certain things that have happened to her. She'll like literally come visit me and bring up something that's happened 20, 30 years ago and like dwelling on it and suffering over it. I'm like, Mommy, please, like let it go. It happened. It's not a big deal. But that's someone with mental health issues. It's not something she's choosing. And, you have to be patient and all of that. But yeah.
It's amazing. So and it's great that it's included in the book because the stories, just listening to you, I'm like, oh, that is a book. Oh, when's the movie? You've done the spoken word, album. You have the book. So when's the film coming out? Because it should be. It really should. I want to pivot a little bit because being a native New Yorker, born and bred, obviously you've seen and witnessed and experienced so much. New York, the past several decades, has experienced, you mentioned the 1994 crime bill, which was not only to New York City, but obviously many communities were impacted by that. This month, we not celebrated, but it was the 23rd anniversary of 9/11. Your poem is now inducted in the Smithsonian Museum's 9/11 archives.
Yes.
Take us back to September 11th, 2001. Where were you?
I was in Brooklyn, which is exactly how the poem opens. I was in Brooklyn watching Manhattan burn. I was on the promenade. I worked right by the Brooklyn Promenade. I would go to work every morning and take the train down to. So I got to work, and right as I was getting to work, I think the first plane hit, and I didn't really see it. I was going in, and then people were talking about it, and then I went, like everyone else, we all went to the promenade.
Yeah, to look.
And the second plane hit already, and then I remember just standing there and just not really being able to register everything, right? I think in moments like that, your brain is going 8,000 directions and you focus on one thing. At least that's what I did. Maybe that's just my poetic lens. And I just remember seeing snow. And I'm like, it doesn't snow in September. Like, this doesn't make sense. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, dang, if you like burn the sky, does it start to snow? Is that what causes snow? Like, just trying to understand, where is this snow coming from? This is like this, flurry, a bunch of flurry just coming in our direction. And when it finally hits us, I remember just like trying to catch it and like figure out like, what is this? And literally people are screaming, crying, going bananas. And for me, it's like, ooh, I can't hear anything. Like, I'm just focusing on this thing, understanding, like every now and then departing from this alleged snow and like understanding like, oh shit, like the city's burning. Like, but why is it snowing? Like, like this constant oscillation between these two thoughts and reconciling both of them and not being able to. And I couldn't even let in what was happening around me. People collapsing, people screaming, people crying. And I remember catching it, and it was ash. Mm-hmm. And then I remembered that's when the panic set in for me. Yeah. I was like, oh shit, this isn't snow, this is ash. And in my mind, it wasn't just an ash of like paper, but I'm like, this is people. This is, and that freaked me out because now it's touching me. Now it's like we're getting hit with it. And it's in my skin, in my mouth, tasting, it's going up my nose. And I'm just like, holy shit, yeah. And I'm just thinking, I got to get home, and I'm like, wait, how do I get home? I got to get through this fire to get home. It was wild. I remember just like having to walk the Brooklyn Bridge. Like everything was just a bunch of walking, then getting there and then seeing people completely covered in snow. And it felt like the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, where Lot's wife, if she turns around, she turns to salt. Yep. That's what it looked like to me. And I'm like, yo, we all turned around. Like we all turned to salt because we wasn't turning our backs on New York. Like we're just going to have to, get eaten by this. And obviously, so many did. I made it home, thank God. And in that poem, I'm talking about buying a bagel. And the entire time I had the bagel with me. Like I didn't eat it. Like it was just this bag, the brown paper bag with the bagel in it, the butter bagel, the little butter stains. And finally getting home, it was so late at night. And I remember just like sitting and looking in the bag and like, oh shit, there was so much ash in the bag. And I was just like, I have like a urn. This is a freaking urn. But it was wild. Yeah.
Having lived in New York during that time, it's funny, we were literally probably crossing paths on the train because like you, when we were on our way, I was with Stan at the time. We were going to the train, typical New Yorker. Oh, a plane hit hit a building. Okay, continue on with your day.
Like, oh, somebody messed up.
Somebody messed up. Keep it moving, right? And we get to work. We getting to work, and then that's when you start, and that's when it starts to set in. Like, oh, this is not normal. Something's bigger is going on.
Yeah. And
it's like one of those things. It's for our generation. It's definitely our Kennedy. Like people talk about where were you when Kennedy was assassinated. And then, New York is, being in New York during the time period that we were there, it's, we have a lot of historical moments like that to share, unfortunately. But great for you that, your work is cemented, literally and figuratively, a part of that. Yeah. A part of that time with your poem. Yeah.
So. It opened, the 20-year anniversary opened with the Smithsonian. It was online because we was during COVID. It opened with the poem, with me reading the poem, like on video. So that was really, really cool. And then like a year later, the 9/12 poem was published. I'll mention this really quickly. It was published in the Common magazine, and it's also in the book. And a lot of people don't talk about the aftermath, right? And the terror that, the Arab community was facing in New York City and probably throughout all of the United States. And, I was often, I can have like an ambiguous cultural background. Yeah. People think I'm Indian, people think I'm Arabic, people think I'm all types of stuff. So the 9/12 poem goes into, it's a story about the first time I visited Egypt, which was the same year. I visited Egypt, January of 2001. And everyone mistaken me for an Egyptian. They kept talking to me in Arabic. I'm like, stop, I don't talk that. And it was really flattering though. Like I just remember like being flattered to be mistaken and just loving the culture. And oh my God, there's a line in there that talks about like when they all got down on their knees to pray in unison, I just balled up. I was just like, wait, how, there's the line in the poem, like, how didn't this plot of land break away and go directly to heaven? I didn't let myself cry, holding it burned. It's because I was like holding it in, but it was burning to not, it was so beautiful and so emotional. And then to fast forward to like 9/12 and have that same experience be flipped over where I'm being mistaken, But this time I'm in New York City and it's after 9/11 and I was on the train like trying to get downtown and this white man spit at me and he was just called me a fucking terrorist, and then people just started to gather and I just remembered, holding the tears and having it burn. And, you know, and just feeling like, wow, like just a couple of months ago, being mistaken was such a phenomenal thing. And here I am now, scared for my life. I didn't know, you know, what was going to happen in that moment, because they were angry and violent and wanted vengeance bad, you know? Yeah. So there's a poem about that too.
And I feel like there's not much that's said. I mean, granted, if you're part of the community, of course they know, but I don't think people really realize. And we're seeing a resurgence of that again due to current events.
Absolutely.
You know, like so many of us, you know, you've experienced so much, you know, as a survivor. What thoughts of the past that bring you joy? We talk a lot about trauma, so I want to talk about the good things.
Absolutely. So definitely, I mentioned like my mom being not only my biological mother, but also like the mother of my art form, my poetic art form. The father of my poetic art form is hip hop, by far. So, oh my God, I loved, to this day, love hip hop. For me, like learning how, understanding poetry or creating my skill set, my art, my craft, the way, my lens, my voice, how I exercise poetry was, you know, first like listening to nursery rhymes and respecting beat and meter and rhyme and, you know, loving that part, that playful part of it from my mom. And then also then the Bible text, and understanding writing for me at such a young age was a means of salvation and a means to expose injustice and sin and evil and demons and how to get out of hell. And like writing for me was that as well. So it wasn't just, let me put some pretty words together. It was like, let's access our divinity. Let's, like, it was a powerful thing that I understood from a very young age that had messages that you should encode, that you should craft beautifully, that you should tell these stories with a goal of salvation or exposing injustice and evil and da-da-da-da. Like, and I think that's what I do in all my poems, but what was so interesting was hip-hop was doing the same thing. It was having the nursery rhymes. It was like having a dad doing what my mom was doing, right? It was such a masculine way. Now it's the flip. So I'm getting the same kind of thing where I'm listening to hip-hop and I'm hearing the salvation. I'm hearing the exposure of injustice and sin and all of that, and through storytelling and through rhyme and through language. And it just, it felt like that same sensation that you have when you smell something really good and your mouth starts to salivate. For me, it would be like I'd get adrenaline in my mouth. Anytime I would hear hip hop, it would flood. And it was a visceral response. So you know you love something when your body's responding to it. So I would definitely say the maternal part was nursery rhymes in the Bible through my mom, and then my father was hip hop. And that was definitely a joyful moment. And I think my happy moment, like my happy poem, is the Stillmatic poem.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that, because that's a perfect segue, because I was going to say, so you released your first spoken word single, Stillmatic, you know, paying homage to Nas' project. You released it in 2021. How, you mentioned how, you know, hip hop is your father, right? So how, give us more details, like how has hip hop influenced your art? Because I know from listening to it, you know, it gives you a visceral, you know, a feeling, an effect. But as far as your writing style or how you're able to bring pen to paper, like how has that influenced you?
I think it just reinforced music into my writing, right? I explain to a lot of folks when they ask me what's my writing process. And a lot of folks, like, they play music. I don't ever play music when I write. And I'm actually shocked that people can do that, because I know poems command their own beat. They have their own meter that you're supposed to abide to, at least. And I'm not going to sit out here and act like everybody has the same process, everybody has the same muse, and everybody has the same lens. I understand that that's not true.
Right.
But, you know, sometimes you expect other people to have the same experience, right? So when people are like, I'm like, music, how? You're drowning out the sound of the poem. You're being so disrespectful.
So even instrumentals, though?
Nothing. I can't have nothing there, because it has its own music. If you read any poem, and and I'm saying this with humility, not like with ego or anything like that. And also been told by other people, but I know this and I can declare it in the most humble way. Any one of my poems you listen to, they sound beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's intentional because they demand to be beautiful, right? They present themselves in such a beautiful way that I'm salivating. I'm like, I got to write this down, right? I understand what the assignment when it comes to me, right? And so I have to surrender to the poem and the beat that it wants and the way that it's telling me certain things. The way the line comes is like, did it. I'm like, that's the meter that I'm going to follow. Yeah. And I follow it through and through. The minute I try to like gear away from it, it feels like right. I could feel it, like my pen won't even let me do it. And so because of that, I think the way hip hop was doing what hip hop did with beats and all of that on top of language, it just reinforced for me how important it is to pair the two, right? Like, even though I'm not ever a person that could ride a beat or rap, and like I wish I could. Like I could never. If you give me a beat and tell me to rap over it, I won't be able to do it. Right. I don't know why. I could dance, like I have rhythm and all, but for some reason I can't do those two things, and I really believe it's because I'm not listening to anything but the poem. Right. If I have something to say, I'm going to say it in the form that it's presented itself. I'm not going to disrespect it because I'm trying to rap over a beat. You know, like I can't, the beat isn't my commander.
Which I find very interesting. So when you're writing, right? So, because, having lived with an MC.
Yes.
So are you listening for, is your mind telling you the cadence, the tone, the diction and everything? You're hearing all this before you even write it down?
The first line, usually poems come to me in a line or a group of lines, right? A couple, and it always has its own beat. It has its own rhythm. It has music. Yeah. All of the work has music. And so I never cared to learn grammar. There's a poem called Without Grammar. Yep. Not only did I didn't care to learn for it, let me rephrase that. No one taught me grammar. My public school education was trash, right? They didn't teach it in schools. And that was okay, because the other thing about hip hop, right, is we make up our own language. Right. That's our own code. We don't abide by those rules that y'all never taught us anyway, so we came up with our own shit, right? And that felt like freedom, right? Now I have even more freedom to write, because now no one's coming over here, no teacher's coming over here and telling me I didn't put a comma in the right place. None of that matters in hip hop, right? But the message was coming across, but you felt it in your core. And that was the point, right? The same way when you hear a Bible text and like those things that's supposed to move you and command you, and that's kind of like the same mission that hip hop was doing, at least the way that I was experiencing it. And the fun of the nursery, like all of it was just kind of like a replica of everything I loved about language.
So did that influence you in doing, because it's one thing to write a book, poets have done it and will continue to do that, but to do a spoken word album with music, how did that come to be?
Such a great question. Because now I could talk about your husband. Because that's the beauty of our project, I think. I think the power of our project, what makes it unique, is that there was a scientist in the room. And I think it was Chuck D from Public Enemy that first called Substantial a scientist. Am I right to say that? Okay.
Yes,
it's
yes
true.
he did.
It's very, very true, because I think what's unique about Substantial and what made this project special is that he allowed me to keep the integrity of the music of the poem. He never and has never asked me to read a poem over a beat. Never once. And it's I really do believe it's the only reason this came to be, because if I had to do that, I don't think I'd be successful. I probably wouldn't like it. I'd feel uncomfortable. But I never had to. He's just like, read the poem, send it to me. I'm like, okay. And he goes in and does his magic and somehow like the cocoon and wraps itself around the poem and gets in all the crevices and creates something like magical. And I think he can hear the beat that is the original music of the poem, and he works with it and around it and enhances it. And And so it's a pair. There's not there's no clash. And I think I've heard that from a lot of people when they listen to other spoken word albums, and no shade, but there's always one or the other is winning. Either the beat is too strong and you can't hear the voice. Yeah. And, you know, my boy AJ said that to me, right? So
shout out to AJ Rios.
Yes, also produced Lunch Lady Jackie on the album. So either the music is winning over or dominating, or the voice is dominating it and the music is kind of bleeding out. There isn't a real good balance or a real good marriage of the two. But what Substantial does is he keeps the integrity of the initial music of the poem, and then also goes in and just enhances. And also because he's such a great lyricist, he understands language and listens to the actual poem. Yeah. I think a lot of producers, and rightfully so, that's their art. They love the music, they love the beat, they want to make the beat the best thing in the world. Even if it clashes, it's okay. It's a sacrifice they're willing to make to keep the integrity of the beat. But I don't believe Substantial. I know Substantial doesn't do that. Like, he keeps the integrity of the poem above all else. Right. And so I was never drowned out. And if anything, it literally heightened the message of the work. I think everyone who's given me feedback, they're like, I'm lost in the story. I'm there with you. I'm all of these things, and how the music just entices and like creates the world, and that's just. It's I don't know. It's just his brilliance.
It's a beautiful, beautiful project.
Thank
you. You all enlisted top caliber artists to work with you to come along on this journey.
Substantial. So, he knows dope people.
My friends are dope, as the T-shirt says. So yes, you on this project, which is again by the same name, To Make an Island of a Street Corner, available in paperback as well as available on all streaming platforms. Yes. You guys worked with, as I mentioned, some great, phenomenal artists. You have composer Mason Lieberman. Yes. You have a producer AJ Rios, who we mentioned. You have producer and classical pianist Lizzie Blue. You have vocalists by Stephanie Gale. You have bass, I believe, by Jonathan Smalls. And then, of course, to bring it all together, of course, we mentioned Substantial, who executive produced it. And then you have mixing and mastering is by Tone Deaf.
Yes.
So you have what hip-hop's finest up in this piece, honey, and just working all of their magic and contributing some greatness to the project. Yeah. Having listened to it several times, do you have a favorite?
A favorite track?
Yeah.
Oh, it's so
no pressure.
Hard. No. I can't do that.
I know, they're all your babies.
Yeah, they really are. Like, man. And they all, I have ones that I have a hard time listening to, like to Deify A Roach. That's the hardest. That's the one probably I've listened to the least, just because it's so triggering. Yeah. Like, one thing I can say about that, and I'll go back to my favorite, but it's just like creating that. I remember describing to someone when I was doing my MFA, and I submitted that poem, and it had to be critiqued, and then they gave it back to me to like edit. And I remember just looking at it and be like, oh my God, I gotta go back into this fucking poem. And my friend was like, why? What's the problem? And I'm like, I feel like I'm sitting with demons playing dominoes. That's what I'm doing when I'm writing this poem. And I'm sitting there, and they're putting urine in my drink, and they're looking at me with like, it's an evil experience. It's awful. It's nothing fun about it. Like, but it's the only way to get to the rawness of it, right? Right. And that particular piece, like a couple of others, it's hard to listen to sometimes, right? But the music helps, right? Yeah. The music helps. And that's the other thing about music. It's just, there's real, true healing in the vibration of it. Like, that's a real thing.
Look, having the first time I heard it, I was stunned, because I was like, I wanted to it's one of those things. It's like, you want to continue to listen because it's so good, right? It's written so well. The story is so captivating, but it's so disturbing. Yeah. So it's like, and it's almost like from a listener, right? You almost feel like a voyeur, like, I shouldn't be listening to this. Like, this is so personal. Like, I don't know, but that's how you know it's that good.
Thank you.
Now, you're doing, you're promoting the book,
Yeah.
you're promoting the album. Have you performed any readings, and is it difficult for you to do the readings?
Yes. So interesting. I had a reading at Lincoln Center. Shout out to Mahogany Brown. She had me come feature. And it was the first time ever that my oldest brother saw me read.
Oh, honey. And you read that one?
I read that one.
Jesus.
And now, mind you, I read that poem to him on Thanksgiving. All my family came to my house for the first time in 28 years. We were all together. They were all home. No one was incarcerated anymore. Everybody finished their bid. And I read them that poem because it had just been published in Common Magazine. And I got zero emotional response. And it was like a bit devastating because I was hoping, we could talk about it. And they were just like, okay. I'm like, it doesn't bother you that I'm putting this out there? Like, do you have anything to say? But anything, just tell me right now. I don't want to, hear through the grapevine. And they're like, no. One of my brothers was like, if anything, you're the best person to tell this. Like, that was the most I got.
Wow.
And my mother, obviously, she was there, and she was kind of like, you've always been such a beautiful poet, Roci. And so I'm just like, all right. I didn't get no emotional response. I'm out here writing my heart out for years. And this was my form of getting a little bit of justice for them, for my community, because it's a way of saying, you're not going to do this to us and just sweep it under the rug. You're not going to, like if you read more of the book, you'll see, they went through a lot. And particularly into Deify A Roach, it goes into a little bit about the violence. My brother, if you see him now, his entire face is different, and he has to wear that for the rest of his life, all those scars. And so I was hoping that, they'd understand that I was home, I was in the world. While I wasn't there with them, I was advocating for them and their stories and making sure they just wasn't forgotten, and the world would know the injustice that they had to suffer and that it wasn't fair, and they were victims of a lot of this stuff, and it was love poems, for all of them, right? And it was my art. This is my number one thing I have to offer the world. This is my gift, my talent, and this is how I'm using it. And I wanted some kind of response, and I didn't get any. But at Lincoln Center, when I read the poems, my oldest brother cried.
Wow.
And that blew me away. And I'm like, what? I remember him telling me, I was choked up, and I was like, hold up, stop the presses. Oh my God, what do you mean? And I didn't think that was possible, right? Because again, to survive 25 years incarcerated, and it wasn't just, he was young and he was angry. He encountered a lot of violence. For him to come home and and then be at the reading and see it and then cry. And I asked him, what's different? I read this to you before, we were so stoic and he's like, it's so different to see you on a stage and everyone listening to you and everyone quiet and hearing these stories. It was just so powerful, and it was such a different experience. It was overwhelming. And I was just very grateful. That moment, it will always be a very special moment. And again, shout out to Mo Brown for having me there as a feature to allow that to happen. Yeah. That was a very special moment.
How are your brothers now?
They are doing amazing things, believe it or not. One of them is working for the Center of Justice. He goes back into prisons and does a whole bunch of presentations. He's done a lot of the things for the arts, even while he, the later part of his bid, he started doing a lot of positive things. And he ran programs. He was the director of programs, and so he made a lot of connections. He came out in Esquire magazine. He was doing a lot of positive work towards the end of his bid. And so when he came home, he got to do a lecture at Yale on, he did get his master's in prison as well.
Wow. Okay.
Yes. He's my brothers are incredible people. My family, they're incredible people. My mother, you see the journey that she went through, she's not a hard, her soul is so pure and so kind and so gentle. You would think that she doesn't hurt, she's a wonderful, beautiful poet. Yeah, she used to beat the shit out of us when we was little with the, with the wires, and everybody's like, oh, that's so abusive. But once we got a certain age, she never put her hands on us. But for her, that's just the discipline she learned,
Yeah.
But she's a very gentle, beautiful person, and I think it's rare to meet people who are that kind, like really kind. And I think my brothers and I, no matter what has happened, we inherited real morality. Like, we're not going to be lying to you. We're not going to be cheating on, like, getting over on people. We're not opportunists. We're not sleazy people, right? We're like, have hard body morals. But that was the other part of it, like having hard body morals, and then growing up in the streets, those become your morals as well. Yeah. And then you become very loyal to that code, and that necessarily doesn't serve you, right? But they, like, lack for a better word, they kept it real. Like, they were real dudes, and they still are. But now that they're home, they're all are working and doing, wonderful things. One is an entrepreneur. Like, they all one got his HVAC license, and, they're raising their kids and the ones that have kids. And they're doing the best they can,
Having completed now written a book, you're a published author, you have released your spoken word album. Obviously, with everything, we there's lessons learned. What advice do you have for aspiring writers or artists that are just starting out?
I would honestly say, learn your lens, right? I think my lens, the thing about any artist, every artist, no matter what medium you practice, you have a specific lens. The way you see this world is very unique and very beautiful. And I want to see the world through that lens, so that learning, like, to really own it, whatever your voice is, whatever it is, be a master of that. I think the world can create so much self-doubt in everyone that people want to see what everybody else is doing, and, kind of abandon their assignment to a certain extent, and want to, create in so many ways. That desire doesn't go away, and it makes sense. I get it. But what I enjoy most about experiencing art when I'm not doing my own is when I get to look at somebody else's lens and, like, oh, wow, I never saw that color orange in that way. Or I never would have interpreted a dance in that way. And it's the people who own their lens, that authenticity that you get to tap into because they owned it. So my advice to every artist, no matter if people like it or they don't rock with it, that's your lens. Own it, because there's something very unique and very special that it's universal, right? Because we can all see pain and joy and color, but when we see it through your lens, that's what makes it so special and joyous. And I know for a fact that I know my lens, right? My lens is very loud and bossy, right? Like, if something is happening, it makes me stop dead in my tracks. I can't continue with my life because it's like, oh, did you notice that? Right. A little girl laughing, I'd be walking, right? Because it's not all about trauma, right? Unfortunately, I was around so much trauma, so yes, I'm going to write about it. Right. But why does the laughter of a little girl, like, why did it make me stop everything I'm doing and, like, that's so beautiful. There's just the ring of it. That, like, the what? How do we name that? Right? And you can name that through your lens and why it made you experience it. Like, interrogate that, figure that out through your lens, and I promise you, like, the world can tap into it and recognize it and appreciate it the way you put it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think that's what I would like to see more of. I do know that, I hate to see people abandon their voice and their talent to do something that's popular or mainstream or something that they feel would be more acceptable. To be courageous enough to do the thing that you may be embarrassed about, that's the thing, right? That you hone into and you sharpen and you own and you accept the assignment. Listen to it. It's commanding you. It's directing you. And the more you listen to it and the more you respect it, the more it'll come. And even if it's painful, like, you're going to have to eat that. You're going to have to surrender to it. Drink your cup of urine that the demons poured for you. And just, it'll end. And something beautiful will come out of it. And I think at the end of it, and this is what I say at the end of the album, poets write pain because when you call a demon by its name, you command it. And I really think that is true for also joy, right? That when we excavate and when we do it, when we learn its first name, last name, middle name, its forefathers' names, and we know it, its lineage, where it came from, the genesis of whatever it is, the joy, the pain, whatever, we own it. It becomes this small, and it's in our hand, and we can access it whenever we want. And I think that's so empowering, and art does that. So that's how I feel about that. That's my advice.
No, and that's great advice, and I thank you for that. Before we wrap out, a couple of things. One, you are a proud parent of 2 beautiful kids.
Yes.
They're not little anymore, but I remember when they were little. As a single parent raising children in the same community,
Yes.
and we talked in length about, growing up in Washington Heights, but you're still there.
Yes.
You're still in the same community. Mm-hmm. What stories and lessons are you teaching them? Now, we talked about trauma. Like, how are you protecting them for any generational trauma that you actively are working towards to help them, to help yourself heal, but also to prevent them from having to experience the same things?
So definitely my number one thing was education, right? So I made sure, because I really do believe like my education from kindergarten through, I would even say the first 3 years of college was terrible. Wow. It wasn't a good education. So I've always felt, to this day, I feel behind. To this day, and I have 3 degrees. As you mentioned, I have an Ivy League degree. I went to NYU, one of the best art schools you could think of, got a MFA in poetry, and I still feel behind. And I hated that, right? I hated that I had to be in these spaces knowing I am smart as hell. I am such a smart woman. But I didn't read the books you read. I didn't have access to them. I didn't get taught grammar. So yes, sometimes instead of saying ask, I said ax. Like, ask me what? Like,
Yeah,
but that isn't a testament to my intelligence, right? There's a very big gap between intelligence and being educated, right? And so at the end of the day, it didn't matter. Like, yes, I'm an intelligent woman, but I understood, I want to say maybe one of the people I've graduated also finished college. Like none of them that graduated high school with me, I don't believe. I would say one that I'm aware of, and I don't know everybody's life right now, but none of them went to college. And I remember having conversations like, you want me to read this whole thing and write a paper? Hell no, I'm out. Like, we were not prepared for that in any way, shape, or form. And I remember being in these spaces and being like kind of picked on by the other students. And why don't you know that? Like certain things, that they would reference certain literature. I'm like, I never read. I don't know shit about Greek mythology. Like, like at the time, right? And still, my passion became Egyptian mythology. Like, I didn't go with the mainstream thing. I don't have to. That's what you were spoon-fed, and you didn't go do the research that was on your lap. It was never on mine. And so I understood how not having a really strong foundation in education can affect your self-esteem. I was very lucky that, again, the one solid thing I had was I can write. I don't care what you say. The grammar's trash, but I bet you, why are you crying across the room? And then copying, the copying. These they'll nitpick, these students who start nitpicking, and then the next day write something so similar. I'm like, thank you for validating that I'm nice, and you're so weak that you had to copy off the girl you just made fun of or whatever. That didn't happen all the time. I don't want to sound bitter. Like, that's not the MO I'm trying to give off. But at the end of the day, it's just like being in these spaces, and I understand why a lot of folks didn't continue. And the catching up I had to do in advance. Like, I remember being in a writing class and my teacher telling me, submit this to a prize, but first you've got to go get a grammar tutor. Like, my grammar was so bad. But the story was so good, great, and the images, the metaphors, like all of that was great. I don't know where to put a comma. Like, I didn't know how to do that. Of course, I ended up getting a tutor, and I paid out of pocket to learn grammar. Syntax, I never mastered. I'm not the best at syntax. But every other poetic craft, especially metaphor, image, storytelling, you cannot mess with me. That thank God for my mother and hip hop and the Bible and all of that. That is a very strong muscle that I have. And so I think that was like my shield. I can walk into these spaces with my chest out because I'm like, you could play with a comma,
Right.
but let's flex here. And so I could continue. And that was my shield. And I could go into and finish college and do all of that because I had that to hold me together. I had something I was very proud of, and that people couldn't really mess with me, my confidence when it came to that. And I knew how to work hard. I worked so hard. I was never afraid of hard work. I worked full time, every college degree. I never not worked. And I have 3 degrees, right? I worked full time, 9 to 5, and went to school at night when I was doing my bachelor's. And you know, that I understood. I was like, it's either this or not get an education. I couldn't not work. My mother never worked, and I did not want to be in poverty. And so that would be my number one lesson, was like, make sure. And I did. Both of my children that are both, thank God, have had, and their entire education has been in the private school education, thank God. And they're both very naturally intelligent, so they have both, right? They're not just book smart, but they're, you know, like they can exercise both things. And the other thing was like trying to not live in poverty, right? I was very like traumatized by living in poverty. You know, I never even owned a pillow. My arm was my pillow. Growing up, we didn't have sheets on the bed. Like, you know, knock on wood, the system hasn't touched them.
Right.
That's beautiful in itself. You know, I've never hit my children.
Yeah.
They've never experienced physical abuse. I never cursed at them. I've never called my kids stupid. Like, we have a loving, respectful home. I'm very proud of that, and I think they will. And one thing my daughter told me today, she's like, Mom, you know, sometimes I feel like people take me for granted, and one thing I can say, you taught me how to love, and I will never diminish that. I'm a love like that, because you taught me how to love. And I'm like, yeah, it was very sweet.
She's awesome.
Very sweet. Yeah, they're good kids.
She's
I'm really
awesome.
lucky. They're actually really good kids. They're funny, they're smart, they work hard. I feel very, very lucky. Yeah.
Well, this is a part where in the interview where we go into some fun stuff, right? We're gonna go through. We have 5 rapid fire questions. 5 rapid fire questions.
Okay.
You know, go with your first gut feeling. Okay. There's no wrong or right or wrong. It's just your personal opinion. Okay. Your preference. So, first one is favorite song from Stillmatic. You mentioned Nas, and that's one of your favorites. And so, what is your favorite song from that album?
I want to say One Mic.
One Mic? Okay.
Right? That's on that album, right?
Okay. Yeah. Yes. All right. Second question. So you mentioned, you know, you're actually double Dominican, right? Because your mom didn't know she was Dominican, but
So my mother's father is Saint Tomian, and her mother is Dominican.
which is actually a segue for my next question. So being, you know, having the Dominican, do you speak Spanish fluently?
Fluently.
So coming from both dual cultures, right? Do you prefer Mofongo or Conch?
Mofongo. I grew up in Washington Heights, right? Like, it's heavy Dominican.
And it's really good. So.
Yeah, and my mom, because she was with my dad, that's the one thing she implemented that was Dominican in our home, was the cuisine. So we had the plátanos, we had the rice and the beans, and, you know, like the typical stuff.
Yeah, the habichuelas. Yes.
But
arroz con pollo.
Nothing else in my household was
Really?
Dominican. So growing up in Washington Heights with a black mother, everyone called us, called me. I can't speak for my brothers, but they called me when I would interact a fake Dominican, because I didn't speak Spanish when I was young. I learned it eventually. And I didn't know any of the songs, so they didn't play Spanish music in my house. My mom was playing country music, R&B, you know, the Marvin Gaye. Like, I grew up with a black mother.
Right.
She did not put on Sábado Gigante, which is what everyone was watching when they were little, like the Spanish channels.
Yeah.
I didn't know none of those references, and I never went to the island. I never went there.
Right.
My mom did not she went that one year, was traumatized, and never wanted to go back. Wow. And she never went back to St. Thomas either. She just stayed. She made an island of our block. Like I didn't get on a plane until I bought myself a ticket when I was old enough to get myself a passport. Like we never moved from there.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it was really wild to grow up in this giant Dominican community, everyone assuming I'm fully Dominican because of how I look, and be around me and say racist things. You know, Dominican people can be very anti-black. And so it was so confusing for me, and I'll let them. That's the one thing about this lens and my ability, my poetry, my art is to observe. I don't interrupt. You assume I'm fully Dominican and you yapping and thinking I'm agree with you, and I'm just like, you letting you show yourself. Go ahead, hang yourself. You got all the rope. And they just say the wildest things, and I'd be like, actually, I'm black. My mother's black. I'm offended. You know what I'm saying? And it's just like, and it was just, it was a wild way to grow up. But that's not to say, usually when I talk about, you know, and also understanding how people would treat my mom. She's as a black woman or whatever, she would be discriminated against as well. But when I talk about those things and they are hurtful and they're wrong, everyone assumes that I don't like being Dominican, and that's so far from the truth. I feel like that is, my blood has more of that in me than anything else. Not that for whatever reason, it pulled me very much, that the culture pulled me very much. I mean, my name is Anacaona, right? So, and that was very, like, the culture, learning, my major was one of my majors was anthropology. Like, I love culture. And what sparked the interest in me in culture was being in that space, everyone tripping about who they were. We're all from we're all from the Caribbean. What are you mad about? Like just trying to find the genesis of it. And also growing up in the 80s and 90s, there weren't many Dominicans. Like, we were new in that area. Everyone would call us Puerto Ricans. Like, if we left, like we was in Harlem or whatever, they'd be like, oh, you Puerto Rican? I'm like, nah, I'm not Puerto Rican, even though I was. I didn't know. I didn't know then. But I remember just watching and like trying to understand, you know, it just sparked an interest in culture. And so I remember just going heavy and really learning the culture and going to the island so many times and loving it, loving the food, loving the language, loving the history. Oh, the history.
Speaking of history, I'm just gonna cut you off there because your name is Anacaona.
Yes.
For those that do not know the reference.
Yes.
Because, you know, as my sister from the island, you know.
Yes.
So my sister is from the Dominican Republic. My family is both my parents are from Haiti.
Yes.
And so please share with the public where the name Anacaona comes from.
Absolutely. So before Columbus, before the island was colonized, Haiti, the original name, the indigenous name that the Taino people gave the island, there were 5 regions. And each of these regions had a cacique, which is equivalent to a king or a queen. Oh, actually, it was all very, Tainos didn't do that thing where they had like a patriarch or a matriarch. They believed in balance. Everything was both. They believed in having representation in both feminine and masculine. But I digress. I always digress. I apologize. So that's to say that Anacaona was also a cacique eventually, right? So some people would translate that as, oh, she was a queen, but there was no distinction between king, queen. A cacique is a cacique. So it's like, if you want to call her a king, you could. You know what I mean? Like, it was the ruler of that area. She ruled in the area of where it's actually now in Haiti. Yeah. So
the South is the South.
The Southwest, right? And so when Columbus arrived to the island, this is who he encountered. And this is who they kind of eventually kind of had to butt heads with. She was a poet, right? She was a poet. She was a songwriter. What they would call areitos. Those are like poems and songs. And she was adored by the people to the point that to this day there's still
songs.
There's songs, and there's in the Dominican Republic there's called Lo 21 Divisiones. And there's a División de los Indios, right? So she's considered a guerrera, which is a warrior, because she did eventually, unfortunately they killed Gaonabo, which was her husband. And it was like he didn't really get killed. His boat was capsized, right? And so the way that my spirit tells me, and they took that boat down, right? Because they fought. Right. It didn't just capsize. But eventually, you know, they lived among, like for over a decade, I want to say a while. Anacaona ruled as after her husband was gone, like she was ruling as cacique and trying to work with the Spaniards, approved interracial marriage, just trying to get like the murder and all of that to subside somehow and live in peace together. And then there was this big occurrence that happened, and it was a fire. They trapped them in this thing, and eventually one of the stories go that they asked her, you could either be a concubine or you could die, and she chose death, and they hung her. But you know, it's such a wild thing that a lot of people, they don't know that story. And you know how she was really adored by her people, and how she tried so hard to create a world where people were living in peace, and she was a political leader, and she was also such an artist, and you know, they really, really loved her. And but she was also a warrior, you know. And I remember learning her name. The first time I went to DR, everyone called me Anacaona. Oh, mira Anacaona. I'm like, who? And they're like, oh, look at Anacaona. Everywhere I went. And I'm just like, I went into a bookstore and I bought an indigenous book. And I was like struggling to read it, but I read it. And one of the first things they taught, you know, her name is Golden Flower. That's what it means. And then that she was a poet, and she's the one that was there and interact, you know, when Columbus was, I was just like, how do I not know this story? Right. Like, this is such an endearing story. Not an endearing story, but it's such an epic story, you know, one that we should all learn and honor her, you know. And I was just so honored. And then knowing that she was a poet as well, I was just like, oh my God. Yeah. So
she's your spirit.
Yes. I just, spirit. It was my way. Taking on that as a pen name was my commitment, like my, what's the word? Like I pledged to spread her story. And so I get these opportunities, right? When people are like, oh, where'd you get the name? Or whenever, sometimes I get to now I get to share the story. Because sometimes you forget, right? Yeah. But I get to rep her, right? And I think that's such an honor. And I try to just, you know, and every time someone hears a story, they're like, oh my God, I didn't know that. And I love it. I don't feel like I'm fully representing the story right now, but by all means, please look it up.
Yes, do your research, yes. But the information is out there, and it's a beautiful story. Yes. And it's very fitting that you know, take that on. Okay, we have a couple more of our rapid fire. We have, so which artist do you most identify with style-wise? Sonia Sanchez or Nikki Giovani?
Sonia Sanchez.
Okay, and why?
She has music in her language. The music in her language is so dominant, and it commands how you read it. It's an interesting thing to read something and never hear the person read it, but the way that the words are laid out and where it breaks and all of that, you read it the exact same way. Yeah. Like, that's a skill. Because somebody could just read it like, blah, 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 and then another person, they'll pick it up and they'll read it in their own, blah, blah, blah. But if everyone is reading it the exact same way, it's because the way you wrote it.
Right. And the breaks.
Whew, like, that's a skill. And the music in her words, like, she got that DNA thing that I was talking about. She was born with it. Like, she's a god. Like, she's dope. But they both are. I love me some Nikki Giovani too. That's no shade to her, but I don't know. Like, I've always really, like, I really admire Sonia Sanchez.
Next one I have it's a film. Both are films.
Okay.
Poetic Justice or Love Jones.
Woo-wee!
Which one? Both are very, very influenced with poetry and love and all that goodness.
You know, I love me some Tupac. I do love me some Tupac. And Maya Angelou wrote all those poems.
Yes, she did.
And I love me some Maya Angelou. Love, love, love. Love Jones was probably my favorite movie for a long time. Why are you doing this? Oh, Lord, that's such a hard question. I guess I'll go with Love Jones. just because I remember
Yeah.
seeing that.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, spoken word.
Right. And the soundtrack was amazing.
Yes, it really was. But, you know, I have some problems with dude. What he did to my homegirl, Nina.
Yes. Yes, he was problematic.
Watching it again now, I was like,
As an adult.
this is a problem.
Yes. I watched it a couple of times and I'm like, oh, I don't remember that.
Right? Like, why was this so acceptable?
Right. That behavior. He had us at breakfast. That's what that was. Last but not least,
Okay.
as you know, we're old school. So, handwriting your poems or typing your poems?
Oof, typing. Only because my penmanship is so bad. It's so bad. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, I can't spell to save my life. Spell check. Lord, thank you. And I think fast. So for typing, what it helps me is to capture the things that are coming to my mind, right? Quicker. If I'm writing it, I can lose it.
Right.
And that to me is so anxiety, inducing. Losing a line, that to me is the ultimate disrespect, right? Because I do think it comes from the divine. Like, the divine took a minute to come visit me, and I'm going to forget what you got to say? Like, no. So if I can type it, I can do it a lot faster, and that anxiety is kind of gone now, because now I can just, because sometimes it comes to me in the middle of the night. I have one eye, you know, and I could grab my phone and be like, okay.
Just type it.
Yeah, I could just get it down, and that has been very helpful. Writing, again, like, I'm not, you know, like, my handwriting is not great. And I'm always, like, misspelling something, and I don't know, I could be, like, on the low dyslexic or something, because sometimes when I'm handwriting something, I'll write the end of the word first and then go back to the beginning. And it's so annoying that I don't know how to stop doing that. Right. So I hate physically writing things. Yeah. It's weird, I know.
Well, it's not weird. Look, this is who you are. Yeah. Okay, this is from your lens. From your lens. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Please, to make an island off of a street corner. It's available at bookstores. You can also have the spoken word album, which is available on all streaming platforms, wherever you get your music.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was great. Thank you for spending the time. Thank you all for joining us for this special edition of Artdustry. So definitely let us know what's next for you, what's going on, what are you working on, what folks should be looking out for.
We about to win this Grammy. That's
okay. We're going to claim that.
Yes, we have this category has been created. It was created 2 years ago. Shout out to Jay Ivy. I don't know him personally, but he trailblazed, and we fought for this category, and he won it the first 2 years. This is the third year, and we are doing that. We have submitted it for hopefully to get nominated. We'll be promoting all of October, and I think.
You feeling good? You feeling good?
I know it. I'm very confident. I think I really do think that the work. It's not me as an individual, or I don't think any of us as individuals, even though the group of people that worked on this project and put it together have been such committed artists and consistently committed for decades, and not doing it chasing awards, and myself included. I'm not writing to chase an award, but I am writing, and I know that they're doing their music to reach as many people as you can. And a Grammy for me isn't the goal. The goal is when you win a Grammy, more people listen to your work. Right. That's what I want. Right. The award itself, as prestigious and wonderful it is, I know what it's going to do is people are going to listen. Yeah. People like to do things in crowds. And if someone tells them this is award worthy, then more people will run to it. It's award worthy regardless, right? I know why I wrote it, and I know that it represents an entire community. It represents a history that deserves to be highlighted and not brushed under the rug. And it also represents all of these artists who have been doing this for so long and doing it so well, and myself included. That deserves to be rewarded as well, right? The real, true commitment to art, the sacrifice, the not being able to turn it off. I think that's award worthy, real, true commitment, right? So I think this would be so deserved. Mm-hmm. And again, and I say that without ego, not like, I deserve it. No, the work deserves it, and the commitment to the art forms deserves it, because it's been, how long has Substantial been doing this? Like over 20 years, right? Like, for the people, because he can't turn that off, like, this is like a lifelong commitment. And I know there's so many others like that, and I get that. But we're here, and we're here right now, and we have this that we put together. It wasn't put together overnight. These poems, these stories were crafted for years and recrafted, and I poured and I studied the poetic craft. I did the work. I really, really poured myself into these poems because I knew it was representative of something bigger than myself.
Right.
And I understand what good art, or art with the right intentions, what the purpose of why you create it, what it can do. It can actually save. It can, like, there's a line in one of my poems, it's like shared suffering dilutes suffering, right? And you can name a demon, and you can control, like, it does so much. And I think when people hear it, especially the people that can relate to it, will feel seen and validated and be like, yeah, that's, I really do believe they would hear it and be like, that's actually exactly how she caught that. She really painted that. And I tortured myself to paint it and capture it in the most honest way possible, so that it can be accurate and honest and representative and penetrate. And then the people who haven't experienced those things, when they hear it, there's a certain, like, connection. Now you see me, now you know what. And then when you establish connection between people, it creates empathy, it creates understanding and love. And at the end of the day, like, that's the goal, right? So if you give it this award and then more people listen to it, we can establish that, and hopefully create policy that doesn't replicate things like the 1994 crime bill, right? It's just, again, I understand that the work is bigger, and I always have, and I always wrote it with that intention, hoping it can reach as many people as possible. And now with this category, I do feel like that can be achieved in such a bigger scale.
Right.
And so here we are, we're going for it. And it's special, it's beautiful. I'm really, really proud of it. And we're going to go hard.
Awesome. Well, you heard it here first. And we'll come back after you guys win the Grammy for after party.
Yes.
All right, folks. Thank you all so much for joining us. This was Anacaona with her book and the spoken word project. Be sure to check it out, again, on all streaming platforms. And thank you for joining us. This is Artistry, where art meets industry. Have a good night.
Thanks for listening to Artistry, where art meets industry. This podcast has been brought to you by Substantial Art and Music. For more information, please visit www.subartmusic.com. You can also follow us on social media at subartmusic. We'll see you soon, but talk to you sooner. Peace.